What's going on, YouTube? We're back at it for another video, and today we've got the best primary weapons tier list inside of Helldivers 2. Detailing out each one of the rankings for each one of those primary weapons, giving you the details on which ones are going to be the most beneficial for you when it comes to facing off with that super Helldive difficulty. I've tested each one of these back yet again after we've got this new difficulty, and now finally putting out my own primary weapons tier list, giving you the details on why some of these weapons are great and why some of them are straight up hot garbage. Now we've got more than a few things to cover, so let's jump straight into it. Starting off with talking about the rankings themselves, I've tried to make this as simple as possible and cohesive for anyone that can read it. Now starting off with the S+ rank, this is going to be for any one of those primary weapons that is good and performing well against both the automaton and the terminid. These are just those weapons that are excelling at being able to take out most of the enemies and just has the capability of being versatile in both fronts of the fight. Right after that, we've got the S-tier Terminid, which these are going to be the primary weapons that excel at facing off with the Terminid, but fall a bit short when it comes to facing off with the automatons. And just underneath that, the S-tier for the bots, which is going to be the mirror of the Terminid, one where the automatons are what the primary weapon is going to deal with perfectly, but with the Terminid it may fall short. Coming up right after that, we've got the A ranking, which is going to be for some of those primary weapons that have a few uses to them, but generally aren't going to be the best at taking out every enemy you may be facing off with. They may have some downsides to them, but they have some aspects to them that bring them up above the other primary weapons that are just straight up functioning and doing some type of special attribute to it that may benefit some loadouts, but not always going to be the best slot option. And just after that, we've got the B ranking, which this is going to be for any weapon that is just straight up functioning. It has the capability of killing. It's not too bad, but it's not too great. It's just one of those weapons that you can use, but more than likely there's better options out there. And last but not least, we've got the hot garbage pile, which this is going to be for any one of those weapons that I deem to be either useless or need some type of buff or complete rework in order to be something of a functioning weapon. And there's going to be more than a few in this pile that may end up being one of those weapons that could have been an A ranking, if not an S tier ranking. But there's some things that just fall a bit short with it. Now let's jump straight into it, starting out with the Liberator, which this is just going to go into the B ranking. This is going to be just one of those functioning weapons. It's the base gun that you get in the game. It functions well, it's got decent ammo, it's got decent damage, but overall, as you start leveling and unlocking other weapons, there are plenty of other weapons that basically surpass this, and plenty of other assault rifles that are just outshining this outright. Coming up next, we've got the Liberator Penetrator, and I'm going to throw this into the hot garbage pile. I think everybody understands why this is. The only thing that's good about this weapon is the fact that it has medium armor penetration, but it does no justice to the weapon, as, simply put, it has too little damage, too little magazine, and too much recoil to be actually worthwhile compared to a lot of the other weapons. And with no other factor benefiting this weapon, there's just too many other options that are outperforming this weapon outright, and for whatever reason, they haven't touched this one since they changed the firing mode to just be full auto. It's a bit confusing to me. I've seen more than a few people try to praise this weapon, but outright, it's garbage compared to a lot of other assault rifles, especially when it comes to a lot of other medium armor penetrating weapons. And coming up right after that, we've got the Liberator Concussive, which this one's going straight into the hot garbage pile, as it just does not have a fast enough time to kill in order to actually compete with the other weapons, or being something that could possibly just be counterintuitive to you coming into any one of those matches. The best option for you with this is facing off with the Terminid, as it does have good stagger power to it and can push back quite a few of the enemies. It's not too bad in that aspect, but the low rate of fire on this is what truly kills it, and if you don't have teammates to help you with taking on some of those crowds, you can find yourself getting overwhelmed quite easily, especially after you've depleted that magazine. Now, more than likely, if they just increase the rate of fire on this, it may be an A tier later on, or if they further increase the rate of fire as well as just giving it a little bit more of that stagger damage to it. If this had the capability of stopping a Hulk or a Charger by hitting them in the weak spot, even after a little bit of sustained fire, that could be a bit more useful. Maybe also with protecting some of those sentries, kind of holding some of those larger enemies still and allowing those sentries to take those on, as well as just pushing back some of those smaller enemies. That could be an interesting playstyle, but for right now, it just fits into that hot garbage pile and needs a little bit of a rework in the coming future, or at least a little buff. Coming up right after that, we've got the Liberator Carbine. I believe that was the name of it. Basically, this is the Liberator, but an SMG variant. All they did was increase the rate of fire on this one and give it a little bit more recoil. It's basically going to be in the functioning category. It's a B ranking, and it's a little bit better than the actual Liberator because it has that increased rate of fire. It's kind of fun to use, but overall, it's one of those that's not bad, but it's not great. It feels like a copy and paste or literally just a reskin or a different firing mode for the Liberator. That's how I felt when it came out. It's a little bit of a cheap weapon in my opinion, or at least a cheap additional weapon. But that's my personal opinion. Coming up right after that, we've got the Tenderizer. Now, some people may make an argument against this, but I'll tell you right now, this is an A ranking weapon. This would be the best assault rifle in the game if it had a magazine that held 60 to 80 rounds. I would highly suggest them doubling up the magazine on this, if not giving it 80 in the coming future. That buff would go a long way, and then that would make the Tenderizer an S+ weapon, because this can be beneficial for facing off with the automatons and the Terminid, for the simple fact that it has such high damage and it is pinpoint accurate. It feels so good to use this weapon. You'll be able to knock out those Devastators by hitting those weak spots in the dead center very easily with this weapon and on the move. And at the same time, when it comes to taking out Terminid, the real problem with this weapon is the fact that it just doesn't have a deeper magazine, and you'll find yourself on reload more often. But it's easy to use, it's got decent damage to it, and overall, it's one of the best assault rifles in the game right now. Coming up right after that, we've got the Adjudicator. I'm going to throw this into the A ranking. This is one of those weapons that some people would probably put into the hot garbage or functioning, but this can be useful when facing off with the automatons, as it does have the capability of two-shotting Devastators. The number one thing that you'll need to do with this weapon, though, is to crouch and just try to rein in that recoil as much as possible, especially if you've got the armor passive that further decreases that overall recoil by another 30% while crouching or going prone. That can substantially help with the Adjudicator. I would really like to see in the coming future them kind of reining in that recoil and the recoil pattern itself. It can be very visually jarring once you get into the first person perspective, as this is one of those weapons that doesn't exactly have the deepest magazine, so you want to tap fire with it, but when you do tap fire, it just randomly decides to jump either up to the left or up to the right, and it can be just extremely visually jarring, and it almost feels as though the Helldiver has never properly shouldered the stock, and he just does not have a good grip on the weapon. But overall, the output of damage as well as the medium armor penetration on this can be somewhat beneficial with facing off with the automatons, and it can be a little bit of a good time. It's not the best weapon out there, but it can also be a little bit useful versus the Terminid, but I would say the focus for this weapon is more towards the automatons and two-shotting Devastators. Having a little bit of that full auto play and not having to worry about just focusing on the limbs or just dead center on the weak spot. Coming up right after that, we've got the SICKLE, which is going into the A ranking just behind the Tenderizer. The Tenderizer just beats the SICKLE by a good bit of damage and a little bit of accuracy. The number one issue with the accuracy on the SICKLE itself is within 30 meters, or I believe 40 meters, it is almost pinpoint accurate, but after you get past a certain distance, it will start to have a massive spread to the shots itself. I believe this is something to compensate for the fact that it does have almost infinite ammo if you're able to control that cooldown with each one of the heat sinks and just not burning through that ammunition too quickly. Some of the drawbacks with this weapon that doesn't make it an S tier is the simple fact that it does have a charge up time before it starts firing, but it's still one of those weapons that can be extremely deadly, and it has a deep ammo reserve in the first place. Even if you aren't conserving on that ammunition or trying to maintain that cooldown, you'll almost have 100 rounds out of each one of the heat sinks out of this, which can feel really nice with facing off of the Terminid, and at the same time dealing with multiple Devastators and being able to have that pinpoint accuracy within a close to medium range. This is one of those weapons that can just start knocking out Devastators left and right if you're able to get pinpoint accuracy on some of those headshots. Overall, it's a great assault rifle. It's one that does actually compete with the Tenderizer depending on your playstyle, and more than likely it may be a bit more beneficial to take this one in against the automatons or the Terminid than the Tenderizer, but the Tenderizer does outperform when it comes to the overall damage output, and that's why it takes the lead over the SICKLE when it comes to the A rankings. Coming up right after that, we've got the SCYTHE, which this one's going into the B category. Some people would probably put this in the hot garbage, but it's not the worst weapon, and in the future, this may actually be a much more useful weapon. More than likely, it'll be in the A category, and it may be S tier when it comes to the Illuminate, as I believe in the coming future, the Illuminate will have energy shields, and more than likely, the laser weapons are going to be our best bet at destroying those energy shields as quickly as possible, and then getting to those fleshy bits behind them. But for right now, the SCYTHE is one of those weapons that can be extremely deadly against the automatons, specifically Devastators. If you're able to get that pinpoint accuracy on the weak spot itself, it can melt them super quickly, and it can burn through some crowds of the Terminid, but overall it doesn't excel at it unless you're using Rover and having the Rover and your laser hit at the same time. That's where it really gets its melting power. But beyond that, for right now, it's just one of those weapons that functions, but it does not perform the greatest. It's hard not to put it in hot garbage. Coming up right after that, we've got the explosive crossbow, and we're putting that at the top of the explosive hot garbage over here. This used to be something that could be a very powerful weapon, especially against the Terminid. It had strong crowd control capabilities, as well as being able to take down chargers by hitting them in the weak spot, and even being able to take down Bile Titans. It was almost like a primary grenade launcher that I was absolutely looking for, and I loved it for a moment, but then they nerfed the blast radius on it, and it completely destroyed the capabilities of the weapon. They added stagger to it, they have made it one-handed, but overall the negatives outweigh the benefits of this weapon, and the biggest thing about it is the fact that it's just a really low rate of fire. It has a very small magazine capacity of only 5 shots, and when facing off with Devastators, which seems to be the focus of this weapon, whereas it's something that's supposed to be dealing damage towards medium-type enemies and not having that crowd control effect, it takes 4 shots directly to the body of any one of those Devastators to take them out, leaving you with just 1 shot right after that. And it's not very fast time to kill just to take down some of those enemies. And if you've got a multitude of Devastators, since it doesn't have that blast radius to cause that stagger effect to ripple across multiple Devastators, it really kind of hurts your capabilities. Even if you are using a ballistic shield to kind of try and close in and get that 1-shot capability, if you're aiming towards the weak spot on the dead center of a Devastator, it just still doesn't end up benefiting you. There's so many other better options, and for right now, until they increase the blast radius on this one, it is a dead weapon, something that I would just keep on the shelf and just avoid using unless you're just looking for something a little bit different. But I do have to leave the last remark on the fact that they did buff it to the fact that you can blow up fabricators and you can close bug holes, but I'd say the Erupter is going to get this job done way better than the crossbow is. And it's going to be much more useful for you. And speaking of the Erupter, we're just going to throw this on in over here at the A category. This is an A ranking weapon. I wish, let's just get it out right now. They need to bring back the shrapnel. The shrapnel needs to come back. We want the shrapnel. Just cannot scream that loud enough. Rework the system with your ricochet and bring back the shrapnel. And add shrapnel to grenade launchers. There. Now, besides that point, when it comes down to the Erupter, the reason it's in the A category is it does still have quite a bit of damage, and with the recent nerfs to flamethrowers and other weapons as well that are just kind of hindering our capability of taking down chargers, one thing to note about the Erupter is it still has the capability of 3-shotting charger if you hit it in that back weak spot. So a stun grenade with the Erupter can be quite powerful, and it does still have the capability of long range, being able to take down fabricators and being able to close up bug holes. It's still pretty decent at taking out the bloaty bugs, the bile spewers, maybe not the greatest when it comes to taking out the alpha commanders, but overall, if you come in with some type of support weapon for crowd control versus the Terminid, the Erupter can be a solid option, and it still will 2-shot Devastators, so it does have its own capabilities of being somewhat of a decent bolt-action sniper when facing off with the automatons, and creating a type of ranged loadout that could be beneficial for you, especially if you paired this with something like the railgun. It could be an interesting playstyle. And coming up right after that, we've got our first S+, which is going to be the JAR 5 Dominator. This thing is dominating everything. I swear, it is perfect for any type of medium enemy. It may not have the full crowd control capability, but it is dominating every one of the Devastators, getting the capability of one-shotting them. It's pretty accurate. It has a decent magazine size to it and a decent magazine reserve to it, but overall, it is going to be cleaning through a lot of those enemies that you have to face off with. It's got that medium armor penetration, really good damage, and you just can't go wrong with this weapon. And it has the stagger effect to it. It is pretty much one of the most well-rounded weapons in the game, and if you're looking for something that's just going to give you what you need for a primary weapon, the JAR 5 Dominator is basically the king at this point. Coming up right after that, we've got the Diligence, which is going to go into the functioning category. It's not bad when it comes down to damage, fire rate, and magazine, but overall, it's one of those weapons that I just wouldn't find myself constantly coming in with. It doesn't have any real huge benefits to it, and overall, the damage on this weapon is one that I wish was on some of the assault rifles, and I wish they just up the damage on this one and possibly give it medium armor penetration and just not give it stagger, and then do something else with a counter sniper Diligence, but we'll talk about that here in a moment. But overall, there's nothing that really shines about the Diligence when the counter sniper Diligence is in the mix. Coming up right after that, I'm going to throw the Counter Sniper Diligence over into the S tier for bots. It's not something I'd truly use against the Terminid, and I don't find it to be that great over there, but when it comes to facing off with the automatons, this thing one-shots every one of the humanoid bots and can one-shot any one of the Devastators as long as you hit them in that dead center weak spot on the center of their chest. This thing can be very powerful. With the rework to the scope, it feels a lot easier to be able to land those shots from a distance, and if you're looking to have some type of playstyle that is a little bit stealthy or possibly just going for that long range capability, and you don't want to have to use something like the Erupter or possibly even the anti-material rifle, but you still want that kind of sniper gameplay, the Counter Sniper Diligence is going to give you a little bit of that. I still hope in the future that they either change this to be similar to the Slugger or make it into some type of bolt action sniper that has the capability of staggering with massive amounts of damage but not being as slow firing as that of the Erupter. But for right now, if you're looking for somewhere in the middle ground of a sniper that has decent fire rate and has the capability of taking out Devastators pretty quickly, the Counter Sniper Diligence is going to be one that is a good bit of fun, and that's why I put it in the S tier for the bots. Coming up right after that, we've got the original Breaker, which was the original king of all the primary weapons back when there was just no other viable options at fast time to kill and just being able to take care of those crowds at certain points. But the Breaker is still going to be something that almost is an S tier weapon, but does fall a little bit short now considering there's so many other better options with more versatile capabilities to some of those primary weapons. But if you're looking for a shotgun that's going to have high damage, fast fire rate, and the capability of still having a little bit of that crowd control, especially when facing off with the Terminid, the Breaker is one that still has that powerhouse effect, and especially if you're able to manage that ammo economy, you can clear through some of those crowds pretty quickly with it. And coming up right after that, we've got the Breaker Incendiary, which is going to be the first in the S tier Terminid, and it is still an S tier for the Terminid, even though they did nerf it recently by reducing its total magazine count down to 4. This does hurt the weapon quite a bit, and you will find yourself in a bit of an ammo economy issue if you're not rolling with a supply backpack or possibly constantly dropping in those supply drops. But if you can work around that and just kind of either come in with that backpack or maintain those supplies, it's still going to be a benefit to you. It is a massive crowd control machine, and I do hope in the future they revert this change and give it back those 2 additional magazines, as this was not something that was completely overperforming or overpowered. It was just a weapon that did exactly what you wanted it to versus the Terminid, which was crowd control. It was perfect for being able to eliminate large crowds of hunters and just kind of keeping a lock on some of those bug breaches, but you wouldn't be able to do it just by yourself if you were in a 4-man group. And even if you did try to do that, you'd more than likely burn your ammo just trying to get it done and then find yourself a bit running away and relying on stratagems just to finish off the rest of that bug breach, which, for me personally, that sounds like the intended function or intended playstyle of the game, is to use all of these in combination, and if I'm exhausting all of my resources on just one bug breach, it sounds like it's working as it should be intended. But until then, if you're rolling with a supply backpack or just maintaining those resources, the Breaker Incendiary is still going to have your back when it comes to taking down those crowds of hunters. Coming up right after that, we've got the Breaker Spray and Pray, and it's hard to say whether or not this is a functioning weapon or if it's hot garbage, and I'm just going to throw it into hot garbage because of the simple fact that the Breaker Incendiary exists. This one's not that great. I would never use this against the automatons. I tested trying it against the automatons. Don't do it. It is a bad choice, and even when facing off with the Terminid, it just wasn't that great at crowd control by itself. The incendiary effect of the Breaker Incendiary just makes it so much better at the damage output, and I don't even know what they can do to the Breaker Spray and Pray to make it a little bit better. Maybe just expand the capabilities of every one of the bird shots or something, but they've got to do something to make this a bit better at crowd control. It's much better than what it was originally when the game came out, when it had absolutely no damage, but it is still something that I would consider hot garbage. Coming up right after that, we've got the Punisher. This is one of my favorite shotguns. I loved using this one back in the day, and once they gave this one stagger and the increased damage, it just put it into the S+ tier category. Now you can use this versus the Terminid or the automatons. Both are going to get staggered. It's going to bully Devastators, and sometimes it can one-shot Devastators if you're up close and aiming towards that center little faceplate. But do keep in mind, when it comes down to the pellets, you will need to hit any one of those Devastators either in the legs, arms, or the face in order to gain that stagger effect, as if you just hit all the pellets at the body, it does have that medium armor, and with the Punisher, it's only light armor penetration, so it will bounce off in those moments and not stagger them, so do keep that in mind. but everything else, it should be able to stagger them. It's pushing back brood commanders. It has substantial damage. It has a decent amount of spread to it in cases where you may be within 10 to 20 meters. You could possibly take down 3 hunters with just one shot with a well-placed shot from this shotgun, but overall, since it does have the shell loading, it's also great for ammo economy, and overall the Punisher is just a force to be reckoned with. One of my favorite primaries behind that of the Jar 5 Dominator. Coming up right after that, we've got the Cookout, which it's hard whether or not to put this above the Punisher or below the Punisher. They're basically the same weapon. There's a little bit of a damage difference. The Punisher has a little bit more damage output. I did notice this while testing both of them. The Cookout, though, does have the incendiary effect, so you can just kind of hit some of those pellets into certain enemies and allow the incendiary effect to burn them out instead of having to waste another shell on that enemy. But with the Cookout, it also has that stagger as well, and when facing off with the Devastators, with it leaving that burning effect on any one of those Devastators, it reduces their overall accuracy for the next shot. So if you're out of ammo, or if you're possibly just kind of protecting one of your teammates, that can benefit your overall survivability when facing off with the automatons. But I think for that reason, I'll put it below the Punisher, as it's one of those that's better suited for the Terminid, but it can be good for both sides of the fight. Coming up right after that, we've got the Slugger, which is going into the S tier for the bots. Now that they've reintroduced the stagger to this weapon, it is back on top when facing off with those automatons, and it is bullying every one of those Devastators. Back before the Jar 5 Dominator actually ended up getting its buff, this was my favorite weapon to use against the automatons, as anytime, since it does have that medium armor penetration, that you hit anywhere on one of those Devastators, you were capable of just staggering them back and holding them still. And at the same time, if you started pushing closer, if you started aiming towards that center weak spot, the little face in the chest, you'd actually be able to get that one-tap capability on them, and sometimes even at a distance you'll be able to get that done, and it just feels good with the Slugger. And since it does have that shell loading, it's nice for that ammo economy, and it can be extremely pinpoint accurate and powerful against the automatons. As well as having that medium armor penetration, it does have the capability of dealing damage towards that back weak spot on heavily armored tanks and cannon turrets. I wouldn't necessarily waste my ammo on that all the time, but if you do find one of them in the state of burning, more than likely you can finish them off with this weapon. That's just something to add towards the Slugger's capabilities. You could use this against the Terminid. I'm not a big fan of it because it just doesn't have crowd control capabilities, but it does have the stagger capability, and I've heard from some other people that they enjoy using it against them, as well as just bullying some of those stalkers with this. So by all means, if you're looking to bully some of those Terminid out there with the Slugger, you know, have some fun with it, but I'd say there's better options out there than the Slugger. Coming right after that, we've got the Arc Blitzer, which I would say this is arguably the #1 primary weapon for facing off with the Terminid right now. This is going at the top of the S tier for the Terminid list. I'm not a big fan of using this against the automatons, as it's just not as deadly against them, and you do have to be up close and personal to get the best or the most effect out of this weapon. And when it comes down to facing off with the Terminid, you already know they're already jumping into your face, and since this has stagger, high damage, and the capability of arcing to multiple enemies, it just makes it that S-tier Terminid weapon. And on top of that, unlimited ammo and a decent fire rate, you could find yourself in situations where if you have multiple bile spewers in front of you, you're able to chain this to hit 1 to possibly 3 of them at the same time, if not one of them, as well as 2 hunters right next to them, and be able to quickly just kind of train some of these Terminid and be able to just slowly churn through them, as well as just staggering them, stopping them from puking, pushing back those brood commanders or multiple brood commanders and the brood warriors that they spawn in, which this really benefits you when facing off with the new alpha commanders. I mean, it's just pushing back all these enemies, dealing decent damage, taking care of the bile spewers and the alpha commanders pretty quickly in just about 3 to 4 shots sometimes, and it's just an absolute powerhouse. And on top of that, just having an unlimited ammo and a decent fire rate to it, I'd probably say get the fun in while it lasts, because they're more than likely going to slow down the rate of fire with this one, or possibly change the damage on it, considering it does feel as though it is performing quite well against the Terminid, and sadly enough, it seems as though if certain weapons are performing quite well, Arrowhead might take a kneecap, so to speak. But for right now, this is probably the best primary that you can use in just about any loadout when facing off with the Terminid. It's going to give you a wide variety of capabilities of just protecting yourself from any one of the enemies below the Charger and Bile Titan. Coming up right after that, we've got the joke weapon. This is something that some people may not even know exists. This is the Knight SMG. I believe this was a part of, it was either a pre-order bonus or it was a part of the Super Citizen Edition. I can't remember which one, but this is, you're not missing a whole lot. This is definitely hot garbage. This is an SMG that has a massive fire rate to it. It is hard to control, super large recoil. It's funny to use at certain times. It isn't exactly the worst weapon, but when it comes down to ammo economy and just the most, or just usefulness of this weapon, it is really not there. It is definitely hot garbage. It's a little bit of fun here and there. It's hard for me not to put it in the functioning category, but because of the ammo economy, the recoil, and just the sheer rate of fire on this and how quickly you dispense that ammo and how hard it is to kind of rein that in at times, it really does kind of put it in the hot garbage category. If you don't have this one, don't worry. You're really not missing out. You're not missing out on a weapon right here. It can be a little bit of fun to use, but it is definitely nowhere near good. Coming up right after that, we've got the Defender and the Pummeler. I basically need to talk about both of these at the same time, as there's literally the only difference between these two weapons. I mean, there's a little bit of a damage difference from the Pummeler to the Defender, but overall the biggest difference is the fact that the Pummeler comes with a little bit of stagger to it, which makes it better than the Defender. The Defender was already good, and I would consider it an S+. I'm just going to throw both of these up into that category, as I love the accuracy with these weapons. I love the fire rate with them. I love the magazine size. Honestly, originally, this was the AR in the game. This was the best AR. It was a fantastic weapon, extremely accurate, easy to use. It's probably one of the most beginner-friendly weapons in the game that gives you a substantial amount of damage, or at least enough to be able to deal with the enemies in front of you. And if you've got a little bit of control on your trigger, as well as just getting decent aim on some of those weak spots, you're more than likely going to be taking out more than a few enemies with these, and it's going to be a bit of a smooth, buttery experience for you. And the Pummeler just makes it that much easier while adding a little bit of that stagger effect to it. And you can use the ballistic shield with this while facing off with the automatons. It can be a little bit of fun, much more fun than using the explosive crossbow, but I would say it can hinder you at times, as if you want a little bit more of that pinpoint accuracy, you will need to get into that first-person perspective. And for whatever reason, when using a ballistic shield now, if you do go into the first-person's perspective, it now shoots off to the right instead of where the laser's aiming. So that kind of destroyed a little bit of the immersion for me. I'm not sure if that's a bug or if that's them going for realism. But overall, the Defender and the Pummeler are S+ in my opinion. They do great on both sides of the fight. And the reason I put both of them in the S+ category is they're probably one of the most well-rounded weapons in the game, and just easy to use for pretty much any player out there, and can get the job done. Coming up right after that, we've got the Scorcher, which is probably one of the most well-rounded guns that's come into the game with the most benefit to it. I believe they haven't touched this one at all when it comes to buffs or nerfs. With the Scorcher, we've got 15 rounds in every magazine. I believe it is 6 magazines in total. It's extremely accurate, and every round is a plasma explosive, so there is a blast radius, and if you hit any one of those rounds towards any type of weak spot, you will get 100% of that damage towards that weak spot. So this means it is going to be very good at taking on chargers by hitting them in the weak spot on the back. But if you have some high ground as well, try to aim towards the back inside of one of those legs. You can take them down pretty quickly with that as well. And if you do actually blow off the armor on the backside of a Bile Titan, go up in front of them and shoot towards the shoulder of the exposed back that has that weak spot to it, and you will be able to take down those Bile Titans as well with just the Scorcher, or at least finish them off with the Scorcher. And on top of that, when facing off with the automatons, you can deal damage towards that back yellow vent on the back of heavily armored tanks or the cannon turrets, and within 15 shots you'll be able to blow up either one of those. Just one magazine from the Scorcher will be able to take those out. And on top of that, it deals pretty well with just about any enemy type that's available, or any enemy that's in front of you. It's taking on Devastators, it's ripping them pretty quickly, it's destroying most of the Bile Spewers, Brood Commanders, but do be careful with this weapon with that explosive radius, as when facing off with the Terminid, if you've got some of those hunters jumping up in front of your face, it can be just one shot in order to take you out, or if you're shooting any surface that may be directly in front of you. So do keep that in mind and be careful with the Scorcher. But overall, it's definitely one of the S+ weapons in the game. And I know a lot of people will definitely vouch for that one. Coming up right after that, we've got the Purifier, and this one's a bit difficult to kind of put into a category. It's not necessarily the worst. I would say this is better suited. This is hot garbage if you're facing off with the Terminid. I would not use this against the Terminid. But if you're facing off with the automatons, you can bully groups of Devastators with this. It is pinpoint accurate. The big drawback is having to charge up the shots in order to land them, but from a distance, if you're playing like medium to long range and you can see a group of Devastators in front of you, you can actually stop them in their tracks and kind of play a bit of that stagger game and just rip through crowds of Devastators with this. Beyond that, it's not going to be that great though, because for whatever reason, when testing this, the new and improved Striders that had the full body armor on them and the rockets on the sides, it does not deal with them very well. Maybe if you threw on a railgun in the combo with that loadout, you'd be able to compensate for that issue. But the rest of the enemies, it does fairly decent against Devastators and the humanoid Terminator bots, but beyond that, it really is not doing a whole lot. You can deal some damage towards the heavily armored tanks and the cannon turrets from different directions. The big thing about it is the fact that it creates an explosive radius, and if you land the shot properly to where that back yellow weak spot is within that blast radius, even if you're shooting from in front of it, it will deal damage towards that. So it does have the benefit from that perspective, but overall it just isn't a great weapon. It's just kind of functioning. It needs more damage to it. You know what, just throw it in the hot garbage. It's not great. It's probably the best use of this thing is just literally bullying Devastators, and it's a better version of the Punisher Plasma, which here we go. I'm going to put this down here. I know a lot of people are not going to be very happy with this one, but Punisher Plasma goes straight into the hot garbage. This thing needs 15 rounds to it. A lot of people really enjoy using this for the same reason I enjoyed the Purifier, but with 8 rounds and having to take 5 shots to take out one Devastator, and the only reason a lot of people are using the Punisher Plasma is the simple fact that they want to bully Devastators and just arc over and easily shoot this thing as a pump action, which, fair enough, I'll agree with you, that can be fun, but the worst part about this is 8 rounds in every magazine. I'm constantly on mags out, getting really frustrated, and I just wish this had 15 rounds like the 2 weapons it's a combination of, which is the Punisher and the Scorcher. Just give it 15 rounds. What's going to break this weapon if it has 15 rounds in the cell? Makes no sense why this is an 8-rounder. Frustrates me ever since the day this thing came in. And every single time I talk about this weapon, I am never going to let this up until they give that thing 15 rounds. But it seems as though all they did was give that over to the Purifier and then force it into a charged state, and it just makes it a little bit more of a frustrating experience. And then overall, both of them kind of fall short. They basically do the same thing that the other one does, except one of them shoots it straight while charging it. And overall, they're just good for taking out Devastators. That's basically their one niche to them. Because if you take either one of these over to the Terminid, I've seen some people try to say that the Punisher Plasma is good for facing off with the Terminid. No, you're basically mopping a floor that hasn't been swept. You're just pushing trash around. This thing is not killing a whole lot of groups very quickly. I've used it several times. It does not deal great damage. It does not have a great blast radius to it, and if you're trying to tell me that you're going to use this for taking out Chargers or Bile Titans, you're better off using the Scorcher or the Erupter. Either one of those 2 options are 10 times better than using the Punisher Plasma or the Purifier. These 2 weapons are only good for taking out Devastators. That's it. And it's only because they actually stagger them. And even at that point, the Slugger and the Jar 5 and the Erupter get that job done better. And even at some point, I think the Explosive Crossbow might get it done even better because it has the capability of one-shotting. Both of those weapons need a rework, in my opinion. And last but not least, we've got the new flamethrower that came with the Flames of Freedom. That's the primary. That basically is the reason that they reworked the flames inside of the game and made the flamethrower worse. This thing not only just comes with a sense of bad air to it, but at the same time it's just bad overall. It doesn't have great damage to it. It doesn't feel like it ignites the ground very well. It slows you down every time that you fire it. The crisper is actually better than this thing tenfold because you can actually be mobile with it, and it basically does the same thing, but not forcing you into having a terrible primary weapon or forcing you to have some type of secondary weapon that may benefit you, and more than likely you'll be constantly switching away from this flamethrower. And you'd just be better off having the flamethrower as a support weapon. It's just sad. I don't know how they'll benefit this thing in the future and how to make it a little bit better, but overall it just falls flat, and it just feels like a water gun version of the flamethrower, and the crisper feels like a super soaker version of the flamethrower that's much better. But that's going to be it right there, people. That's going to be the entire tier list. Let me know down in the comments below how you feel about some of these rankings. You know, what are your preferred S+ rankings? What are your S tier Terminid and bots? You know, do you disagree or agree with some of these choices? Let me know down in the comments below. Not a fan of the Punisher Plasma. I know some people will more than likely sound off that in the comments below. Please do tell me why that might be something better or some more usefulness out of this. And, you know, if you start to tell me that it can shoot behind heavily armored tanks or do the same thing that Purifier can, or that it just somehow is great at crowd control versus the humanoid bots on the Terminid side, or against the automatons, I mean, well, just let me know down below, and I guess I'll read it, and I'll probably give it a like. At least you gave me some halfway decent information that's accurate, but doesn't really change my mind about the Punisher Plasma. Now, we will be doing a support weapon tier list here in the coming future, so do hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more content coming in the future. We've got more than a few loadouts to be made with this, as well as some videos talking about some things like the ARC Blitzer and building loadouts around them, as they are feeling much better after this recent update, especially ARC weapons in general, but more than likely the ARC Blitzer is going to be the only ARC weapon that actually got the hugest benefit out of this buff. With that being said, if you'd like to see more content like this in the future, hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to see some of this content live, hit that link down in the description below. Follow me over at Twitch. We'll be streaming daily. And on that note, have a good one.